Hey guys, welcome to my channel. Today we'll be taking a look at a game from the 2024 45th FIDE Chess Olympiad. So this game was played in round 3 between Cheparinov again and Fabiano Caruana. So let's just jump into this game. Cheparinov is white. He is a grandmaster who is rated 2600. And Fabiano Caruana, I think you guys all know him. He is rated 2800. So very strong players, both of them. And let's see. So Cheparinov started with e4 and Caruana played c5. Knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, e6. Now, actually, before in one of the videos, I have in one of the videos, it was a gameplay between Andre Mundis, I believe, against Levon Aronian. That game was in round 1. You guys can also take a look at that game. Here, like in that game, Levon played knight to f6, but in this game, e6 was played instead. Both are main lines. Short castle, knight g7, rook e1, knight to d4. Knight d4 is not the best option here, but it's okay. Probably black can also go a6 to kick this bishop, because after a6, for example, bishop takes c6, let's say, knight takes c6. Black will be like developing smoothly. But of course, here after a6, white can also go back to f1, bishop f1. So let's see how this game went. This game is pretty long, so I'm not going to explain each move, because that will be taking too much time. This game had played about 70 moves, so that is a very long game. So knight takes d4, c takes d4, c3, a6, and now bishop f1. Knight c6, b4. So of course, as white, you really don't want to take on d4, because after knight takes d4, not only that your d pawn will be a weakness, but after, let's say, knight to c3, bishop c5, you will have a hard time to develop this dark square bishop. Why? Because if you go d3 here, then you'll have a hard time to develop this light square bishop, because it is now blocked by the d pawn. So white will have a dilemma. Of course, you don't take on d4. And Ivan knows that. He played b4, bishop d6, and now bishop b2. Here, now white is actually having some ideas on, having some taking ideas on d4, because white can take on d4 and go for d5 breakthroughs in the center, because black hasn't castled yet. So Fabiano saw that idea and took on c3 instead. Now, white took with the pawn, of course, because if you take with other pieces, you'll lose the b4 pawn. Let's say you take with the bishop, for example. You might say, well, if black takes on b4, I'll take the g7 pawn. But of course, black won't be taking on b4. Black will just go short castle, and probably this position is okay for both sides, actually. In the game, d takes c3 was played, opening up the center, and the queen is also attacking the d6 bishop. Queen c7 was played. Now black is trying to trick white into not seeing that h2 is being attacked, but of course white saw that and played h3. Short castle, knight d2, just simply developing b6, a3, bishop b7, c4, bishop h2 check, king h1, bishop b5, queen b3, bishop takes, queen takes. All of these moves are really just the best moves, so no comments about these moves. King g1, a takes b4, a takes b4, knight e5. Now probably rook takes a1 will be a better option, just to trade off all of the pieces. And then you go rook a8, probably here, and after, let's say, rook takes, bishop takes. This will just be a pretty much equalized position, but I guess Fabiano doesn't really want to play that solid. He wants to play more aggressive. So he instead played knight to e5, putting pressure on the c4 pawn as well as the e4 pawn. Queen d4 was played. In my opinion here, white has a small advantage. Why? Because first of all, white has a lot of space. Like white has more space in the center than black does. Second of all, this b6 pawn is a huge weakness. And white is also threatening to go f4. So black's minor pieces, especially the minor pieces, are kind of misplaced, like this b7 bishop. So in the game, h6 was played. Rook e1, knight c6, back, queen c3, rook a1, rook a1, rook c8. So we can see that black's main idea here is to put pressure on the c4 pawn, and that is what Fabiano is doing. Queen b2, d6, knight to f3, knight d8. Now, you can actually focus on this position here. Now you can see that. First of all, let's just trying to evaluate this position. What is white's idea? What is black's idea? What are white's weaknesses? What are black's weaknesses? And who is better here? So actually, I think here, the heart of this position are these two knights. Because comparing the bishops, so you can see that the queen, the rook, the bishop versus the queen, the rook, the bishop are they are pretty similar. The queen and the rook they both stand on very active places. Like the white's queen and the rook, they have, like, the rook has open files, the queen has an open diagonal, but at the same time, black's queen and the rook, they are working together to attack the c4 pawn. And now let's compare the bishops. The light square bishop is defending the c4 pawn, and black's bishop is attacking the e4 pawn. But white can just, develop, trying to defend these two pawns with bishop d3. And actually, in this position, I guess, this pawn, one day white will go knight d2 and f3, and this diagonal will be just blocked by all of white's pawns. So these two bishops are all not that active, which leads us to these two knights. We can see that these two knights, they really don't have good squares to go to right now. You might say, okay, knight d4, knight b5, but right now, if you go knight d4 immediately, you lose the e4 pawn. And black is probably going for e5 ideas, knight d6, knight d4 ideas, or knight f4 ideas. So now this position, let's evaluate. We have just evaluated each piece, we've compared them, and now let's evaluate this whole position. So actually, I think it's a pretty much equalized position, and one side needs to break through in the end. It needs to rip up this position in the end, but it's just a matter of how fast or who it is to open up this position first. So in the game, knight d2 was played. First of all, defending this e4 pawn. Second of all, probably in the future going f3 and then knight b3, knight d4, knight b5 ideas. In the game, e5 was played, so you see that this is just the idea that I mentioned earlier. Black is going for knight e6, knight d4 ideas, which is very annoying. Bishop e2 was played, rook b8. Now, bishop e2 is actually very tricky because if you just go knight e6 immediately, then you'll fall for white's trick, which is to go for bishop g4, pinning the knight and the rook, and the knight will be taken by the bishop on the next move. And let's say if black goes, for example, rook d8 after takes, it is a knight versus bishop endgame. And I think white is better here because the knight is clearly more active than the bishop. So let's go back here. Rook b8. Fabiano saw that idea and first of all moved the rook away. Rook a3. White is having some kingside attack ideas, so he is trying to maneuver his rook to the right place. Knight e6 was played, bishop f1, knight d4, f3. And after bishop c8, knight b3 was played, trying to trade off this knight. But because here it is clearly, black's knight is better than white's knight. So white is, so it's reasonable for white to trade off black's knight. But of course, Fabiano don't want to allow that to happen and play knight c6. And now white played knight a1. White's idea is now to go knight c2, knight a3, knight d5 to go to the outpost for the knight. Bishop e6, knight c2, h5, king h1, h4. So we can see that Fabiano is now creating a huge space on the king side, and you can take a look at the dark squares now. They are very weak. in white's territory. And one day they will become black's main idea to get into white's territory. Queen d3, knight e7. So black is already threatening to go knight g6, knight f4 ideas. Knight e3, knight g6, queen a1, queen d8, threatening queen g5, queen e1, knight f4, queen f2, queen g5, rook a1, knight to h5, threatening knight g3. But actually, all of these threats, they're not that deadly. Probably white does have some pressure, and black is the side who will be playing more active than white. But still, this position, there's like no clear idea for black to win or create some counterplay. Bishop d3 was played, g6, king h2. White is just simply waiting. King g7, bishop f1, rook c8, b5. So fixing the pawn structures on the queen side, and one day maybe winning this b6 pawn. Queen d8 back. So Fabiano now realizes that, okay, I have no counterplay on the king side, and I am going to switch sides and go to the queen side. King g1. And because white has pushed b5, now that c5 square is a huge weakness, but also the c4 pawn. Knight f4, rook a7, rook b8, king h2, knight h5, bishop d3, queen g5. Both sides are just repeating some of the moves. No one really has a clear idea whatsoever, but one has to make a blunder first. Bishop f1, queen g3, finally trading off the queens, and some actions are going in this position now. King g1 was played. Of course, you don't want to trade immediately because there will be h takes g3, and after king g1, king to h6 or knight to f6, let's say, and knight d7, knight c5. Black will be better here because black has the more active minor pieces and the better pawn structure. So let's see how the game continued. King g1 was played, and now knight to f4, threatening knight h3, which is a very deadly threat. Queen takes, h takes, knight d1, rook c8. Slowly and surely, black is getting into white's territory. So as you played on in this position, white will slowly realize that things are going very strange, going bad and bad. So the situation is going downward for him. Knight b2, rook b8, knight a4, bishop c8. This is the best move in this position because if black doesn't go for that, then white will go rook a6 on the next move to win the b6 pawn, and probably white will even win this game. Bishop c8, knight c3, going for knight d5 ideas. And after king f6, knight a4, king g7, knight e3, bishop e6. So you can see that white, of course, wants a draw against Fabiano Caruana, and he is already repeating moves. But here, instead of going king f6 again, which will be two repetition already, and if white goes knight a4, king g7, and back and forth, that'll be three repetition, and that'll be a draw. But Fabiano refused to make a draw in this position, and he played bishop e6, still trying to create counterplay. But after knight a4, he played king h6. Now, king h6, it actually gives white some opportunity with rook a6, which was playing the game and winning this b6 pawn actually. Bishop c8. Now, white actually played rook a7, which I don't really understand. Probably he thought that, okay, if I take with rook b6, there's rook a8 ideas, and probably if I go back with the knight, there are rook a1, which gives black a lot of counterplay, but actually it's not that clear what black can really do. After rook d6, for example, let's say rook c1, knight d1, white is just up 2 pawns, and there's no reason for white to lose this position. But in the game, both sides doesn't really have any time left on the board, so it's reasonable to figure out that, okay, I don't really want to give black any counterplay, and I'm just going to go for the calm way. And f5 was played in the game. Fabiano is now pushing the pawns on the king side, trying his best to create counterplay. Knight c3, king g5, e takes f5, bishop takes f5, rook a6, king to h4, knight to a4. This is a mistake because now black can actually go d5, which which Caruana didn't see in the game, because after knight b6, d takes, knight takes, there's rook takes b5, sorry, and after rook to a1, bishop d3, this position black will be better because black has more active pieces than white does. But in the game, Caruana just simply blundered here with bishop c8. And he should have played d5, which I've just analyzed. But instead, he played bishop to c8. Now, rook e7 was played, but still, again, he should have taken on b6, and after rook a8, knight c3. But probably here, he thought that there was knight g2 ideas. Because now after... But now actually there's this only move, which is to go rook d6. And after rook d6, it's actually very hard to spot when you only have 4 minutes left on the clock. So it's reasonable why white doesn't have the courage to take on b6. Because after knight e1, attacking the f3 pawn, you have to go rook g6. And after knight f3, this position just looks very scary for white. His king looks like is going to get mated in any time right now. If you go king h1, then you'll lose after knight d2. And let's say if you go here, there's rook a1 check. And if you go king g2, there's bishop h3 mate in 1. But I mean, here the only move is to go king g2 basically. After king g2, knight e1 check. And after king g1, probably you'll have to go rook a1. But still, this position is completely fine for white. White is going to hold this position. But in the game, white played rook a7. And after king g5, knight e3, bishop b7. Bishop e2 is now a mistake because he didn't saw d5 coming. What he should have played was to go rook a4, because now after d5, there is c takes d5. You cannot take with the knight because there's rook g4 winning the g3 pawn, so you cannot go d5 whatsoever. Rook a4 still holds the draw. But instead, white, after playing so many moves under a lot of pressure, finally made a mistake here after bishop e2, allowing white to go d5, and now he is just simply losing. After c takes d5, rook c8, knight e4 check, and a king h4, rook c1 is unstoppable. Because if you go, for example, rook a1, you'll lose the bishop. And if you go, for example, like bishop f1 to defend, there is still rook c1 and knight e2, king h1, rook f1 is mate. So this position here, after king to h4, white resigned the game and Fabiano Caruana won this game. So it was a very hard game to win. It was a draw, always a draw. But white doesn't have the courage to take on b6. There were 2 times that white has the opportunity to take on b6, but he just thought that black has so many counterplay after rook a8, rook a1, so he didn't took it. But in the end, finally he was under time pressure as well as the position. He is under too many pressure, and he finally blundered in the end with bishop e2 and lost this game. So it was a very fascinating game, and hope you guys enjoyed it. If you like this video, you can comment down below and tell me, and hope you guys learned something in today's video. Please subscribe and see you in the next video. Bye!